she's not here.
I haven't seen her. Welcome, folks. This is Joint Legislative Committee on Justice Oversight, Joint Justice Oversight Committee. It is August 5th. This is our first meeting off session. We will be having 6 meetings total. We'll have 5 more after this. So the first item on our agenda is getting an update about our committee charge. And we do have a new legislative council person staffing us. Hillary, welcome.
Thank you.
Hillary is new to the legislative arena back in January. And now you're gonna get your feet wet here. So
Looking forward to it.
yes, so turning it over to you, you have a document. And I'll turn it over to you. So if you could just introduce yourself for the record.
Perfect. For the record, Hillary Cheddar Ames, Office of Legislative Counsel. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. For the visual learners among us, sometimes it's nice to have something to look at in addition to hearing
So-
titles at tones.
With sharing the screen for you folks who are on Zoom, I won't be able to see if your hand is up, but Megan, you'll be able to. So Megan will let me know if any of you have a question or comment, okay?
Perfect. So the goal of the overview this morning is just to give you kind of a roadmap of what to expect both today and in the upcoming meetings. Earlier this summer, you received a chart. I think today you have available to you an updated one that just has links to final act language, which was not available for all of the bills at the time the first chart was made. And that has all the details. The slides that I'll use are just kind of a bird's eye view. And we'll go ahead and kick it off. The order is a little bit different than the chart, I should say. This is organized to have the items on today's agenda first. So there will be a little difference, but feel free to stop with questions at any time. So one of the first items on the agenda for today and for the interim comes from H550 or Act 117. H550 or Act 117 created standards related to gender identification, searches, and housing placement for transgender, gender diverse, and intersex individuals in correctional facilities. And I'll come back to talk a little bit more in detail about this at the end, since you'll be hearing first from some witnesses on H550. But I'll flag now that there are 2 parts of this act that are charged to justice oversight. The first relates to search policy. The bill and the act as passed includes some general standards related to searches, but the Department of Corrections was in the process of revising one of its relevant search policies at the time. And so the bill tasks the department with submitting that policy back to Joint Justice for review. And Joint Justice is charged with reviewing the policy, including whether any statutory changes might be warranted. The second piece from this bill relates to gender affirming medical care. And the act as passed does not include language specific to medical care in correctional facilities, but it does charge justice oversight with reviewing current practices related to gender affirming care in correctional facilities and submitting a report to House Corrections and Senate institutions, including recommended statutory language. So I'll talk a little bit more about those 2 things kind of at the end to tee up the witness that will follow me, but just wanted to flag the high level at the beginning.
So the language in terms of having us, Joint Justice, do a deeper dive into the healthcare issue, we ran out of time when we were working on the bill in committee. It's a very complicated issue, and the scheduling of POC, the scheduling of WellPAC was really difficult squeezing. So we said, let's do justice oversight. We'll spend a little bit of time on this. So this one's going to need a lot more work.
And this one is one of the most active roles for justice oversight. Committee is charged with submitting a report and recommendations. Moving forward, the next is H937 or Act 165. This has to do with the accountability dockets. So you'll hear more from witnesses later today, and the reporting is indeed at this August meeting. But a bird's eye view reminder that starting last fall, a pilot accountability docket was operating in Chittenden County. It involved a variety of stakeholders, and it dedicated resources to accelerate court proceedings of criminal cases involving individuals with 5 or more open charges, and to connect those individuals with treatment, housing, and social services. That pilot cleared a backlog of criminal cases involving those individuals. And again, your witnesses today will tell you much more. But in short, Act 165 calls for expanding the rapid accountability docket model to other counties in the state. And it has some required reporting to this committee, appearing at this August meeting to report progress on implementing rapid accountability dockets. So I believe that's on the schedule for this afternoon. And just for context, there will also be a report in December to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees and to the governor. So Secretary of Administration is charged with submitting a full written report on the same topic on before December 1st. Any questions on this one before I move forward? All right. Next, this comes up in 2 bills in Act 144, sorry, acts. I'm used to referring to bills, but I'll make the transition.
That's right. I still think of that.
Yeah, you might know them by the bill number more readily. So I've referenced those all along the way. So we have Acts 144 and 163, and that's requiring periodic updates at the August, and then you'll see this again in October and December of those meetings. But the Department of Children and Families and BGS are required to report on progress on the plan to develop the Green Mountain Youth Facility. A reminder, that would be a residential treatment center for justice-involved youths with complex mental health and behavioral needs. Previous state facility closed in 2020. There is a temporary facility, but that is a temporary one, and this would be a permanent one. So there'll be some reporting both today and at future meetings on the plan to develop that. I'll keep moving along, so I'm not the one who delays our schedule this morning, but stop me again at any time with questions. Next is receiving a report on the plan for providing network connectivity in state correctional facilities. So this will be at each scheduled meeting. You will hear from on this topic regularly. So the committees this spring heard testimony that DOC facilities have limited cell services and no Wi-Fi. There have been efforts underway since 2022 to study and price and fund Wi-Fi installation. So Act 163 allocates $50,000 to the Department of Corrections to work on developing a plan for network connectivity. Witnesses that you'll hear from today will be able to speak in more detail to where that plan is and what it will contain.
So if I can interject.
Yes,
here
please.
as well, there was, Trevor, you remember, and my committee worked with Agency of Digital Services, as well as DOC, to really keep their feet to the fire, to develop a plan and start formulating what it's going to look like, what's needed, what the cost is, so that we can start addressing the issue of lack of Wi-Fi right now in our correctional facilities. And we've been trying to deal with this last year. There was an application put in to the broadband board to see if we could get some money through there. That was denied. And it's just been lagging. And, you know, DOC will say, we have a plan, it's been approved. You talk to ADS, ADS says, no, the plan hasn't been approved. No, there needs to be more work. And finally, we said, look, it's got to get done. So that's why we put in the language they had to come before us at every one of our meetings to give us an update so we could get off the dime and start doing this. Because DOC really needs this so that they can function. And also it's a security issue within our correctional facilities. It would have streamlined the work of our staff. And it would also help the folks who are residents there in terms of being able to access possibly CCP courses and just general use of their tablets or how they use the tablets for their educational purposes, as well as communicating with their family. So that's why we said, come before us at every meeting make sure that they're working on this.
Great. Moving forward, this one, a number of you will be quite familiar with. This is S-193, Act 147, and this was the forensic facility bill. So S-193 or Act 147 requires AHS by 2029 to establish a forensic facility that would house and treat certain persons who need mental health treatment after having been charged with serious crimes. And it also requires AHS to operate an interim forensic and competency restoration program until the permanent facility is established. So remember those two pieces. There's the permanent facility. Those provisions of the Act don't go into effect for 3 years. Then there is the interim program that would be effective next July. And the reporting that you will receive is on both fronts. So for the permanent facility provisions, AHS is charged with developing a feasibility plan for establishing the permanent forensic facility. That plan is due to standing committees January 15th of next year. But AHS is also required to provide interim status updates on that feasibility plan for the permanent facility to Justice Oversight at the August, so today, meetings, and then November meeting. So you'll hear about this again in November. The second piece of S-193 or Act 147 is the interim forensic and competency restoration program. And for that piece of the bill, AHS is required to implement emergency rules in December of this year, by the end of December this year, for the interim program for how people who would qualify for the forensic facility will be treated prior to the permanent facility being established. So the second piece of required reporting for AHS to this committee is the interim status update on that emergency rulemaking. So two things, two parts of the update from AHS that'll happen today and again at the November meeting.
I just a comment because I just want to remind people that this is not only a facility, that this act does not only cover individuals with mental health challenges, mental illness, covers people with actually a wide variety of cognitive and or developmental impairments or disabilities. And I just want to encourage us to use language that's inclusive so that people don't have in their minds that this is only for people who have mental illness.
So that covers all of the agenda items for today, but as you will have noticed, a number of them have continued reporting or repeated reporting in future meetings, so it will not be just today. These last few items are not necessarily scheduled or not scheduled for today, but have some reports due and will likely occur at future meetings. So this first one has to do with Raise the Age, and this is Act 4 of 2025. The acts I've otherwise mentioned so far today are of this year, but this act has two required reports from AHS, one that has been submitted July 1st and one that will be due on December 1st. So reminder, Vermont began implementing Raise the Age in 2020. And that initiative increases the maximum age when a young person who commits a crime can be charged as a juvenile in the family division, as opposed to as an adult in the criminal division. The first step was effective July 2020, and that raised the upper age limit to a youth's 19th birthday. So that means anyone aged 18 or younger who commits an offense, other than some identified serious ones, would have their case start in the family division. Raise the Age Step 2 was initially scheduled to take effect in 2022. That's been pushed back several times, and most recently, Act 4 of 2025 extended the effective date to July 1st, 2027. So again, that, sorry, I misstated that earlier. Raise the Age Step 1 is anyone aged 18 or younger who committed an offense. Other than the identified serious ones, would have their case start in the family division. And step 2 is would be 19 or younger, And that effective date is, at this point, set at July 1st, 2027. But AHS is charged with reports on progress toward implementation of the Raise the Age initiative, that one in July, and then another one in December. Any questions on that before I move forward, or comments, of course? All right. This relates to something Chair Emmons mentioned earlier. This is another Department of Corrections connectivity or tablet related issue. So for H294 or Act 139, the committees heard testimony that the Department of Corrections contracts with external providers to provide some of their telecommunication and tablet services. They heard about the costs of those services. They also heard testimony that some other states offer no-cost services of that nature to incarcerated individuals. So Act 139 requires DOC to provide a written report evaluating options for providing no-cost telecommunications services to inmates in DOC's custody. And that'll be a written report to House Corrections and Senate institutions on or before December 1st. And Act 139 spells out what should be included in that report. But there are interim reports, essentially drafts of that written report that are due to Justice Oversight, a first draft on September 15th, on or before September 15th, and an updated draft on or before November 15th. And DOC is required to provide those for this committee's analysis and input. Chair, I don't know if you have other things to add about the tablet-related requirements. All right. Act 139 does have an intent section that captures some of the goals of requiring this kind of reporting and considering it. So happy to talk more about that at any point for those interested. The last one is a contingent thing. Contingent on the use of funds. It's possible that the Commissioner of Corrections or BGS would come in to update this committee on use of funds. Some funds were prioritized for bathrooms, showers, and floors at CRCF. And if funds get used to respond to overcrowding at CRCF, but at other correctional facilities, then DOC and BGS are required to come and update this committee about those uses. So that covers the universe, covers the overview. Happy to answer any other questions? And otherwise, I'll take a few moments to turn back to H550 in a little more detail to set up our next witnesses. But I'll pause on the roadmap for now. Any overarching questions about what's on deck?
Okay, Wendy, Senator Harris.
Thank you. And thanks, Hillary. This is really helpful. So on the last item that is still on the screen, is reporting to this committee contingent? There isn't a deadline for them to come to this committee.
Yes.
Or at least I don't see it. Okay.
The reporting is only required if they use the funds other than as designated. It doesn't include language like at the next meeting or as soon as possible, but I think it's fair to say that that would be the way to proceed. But as soon as they know they're going to use the funds differently, they would come to the committee to provide that update. But I think those folks will be in front of this committee for other reasons. And so I think if the committee wants to clarify that for any reason, there would be an easy opportunity to do that.
Perfect.
Note for my drafting in future that, not that I drafted.
Yes, I think it is important that this committee know what is happening because especially obviously in the women's facility, that building is substandard. So that's just my comment. You don't need to respond to that. Thank you.
The priority was doing the repairs to the bathroom and showers and the flooring at the Chittenden facility, but there was also flexible language and some of that money could be used to respond to overcrowding in other facilities. So that's the check that we want to have on BGS and DOC if they want to use those funds for the overcrowding issue in the other facilities.
The way I read this comment here is that overcrowding at the Chittenden facility. So,
applies to other correctional facilities.
right, to respond to overcrowding at Chittenden. So I guess that was part of my question to follow up to Senator Harrison. So does that mean that women might be placed at other facilities and they might need to do renovations at those facilities in order
That's
to
a
respond to that?
possibility.
Okay.
That was a possibility. And in conference committee, we were concerned that we need to know if you're gonna be moving part of the population somewhere else, or if you're making some real changes in some of the other facilities. That we need to have a say in that, or at least be aware of it.
Thank you.
That we don't read about it in the press.
Right. And just to clarify, that information is important to us, but also the information on how they are addressing the issues at CRCF is also important.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Members? Okay. Let's jump right into the first topic.
Great, so. And I didn't mention this up front, but in addition to these kind of specific charges, there is the general oversight committee charge. That's 2 VSA 802. So to the extent that there are interests in oversight of these topics that aren't specifically named in what I just went over, there is that authority there that covers this committee looking into that. Reviewing, recommending, providing oversight are kind of the key verbs in that section.
No, we have our work cut out for us.
It looks like Senator Lyons raised her hand, so I'll pause.
Jimmy?
Yeah, so thank you. As you're talking, and I have been thinking about additional topics for our agenda, and some of those appear nowhere in our legislation, but our charge is very clear. So I think as Alice and I and Hillary and I work on next agendas, I will be placing at least 1 or 2 topics that have nothing. Well, there's a lot in legislation and in laws, but nothing in our charge, directly in our charge. So I think it's really important for us each to keep a running list of those things that are important. This committee doesn't work on an emergency process. So in other words, if you think of something for the meeting, and I know that some of us have, that and the agenda's already been set, it's very difficult then to go and find people within a short period of time. So just saying, keep a list and then forward your ideas along to Alice and to me and to Hillary. And that way we'll make sure we cover our interests or not. It depends on how much time we have over the next several meetings. But I do have a couple of thoughts for us going forward.
You want to share those now, or do you want to wait on that?
I need to get them a little more mature in my thinking, but yes, some of them will relate to substance use disorder that we have not talked about, and the relationship between substance use disorder, the courts, and public safety. And that's clearly been a concern for some of us in health and welfare, and I know in judiciary. But yes, and I've had a couple of bills in this area, and we'll just have to see what we can think of collectively as a joint committee going forward. But that's one of the thoughts that I had.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else? So let's move on to H 550 or Act 117.
117, yes.
And you have here 2 documents. One is the actual act number, and then the other one is the 550 as it was voted out of House Corrections.
An early draft of the bill. It was the last draft of the bill that contained medical care related language. So this is just for the committee's reference, if and as useful. I'll mention that when I talk about gender affirming care shortly. to start on searches, I have pulled up on the screen Act 117 and the searches language that is in the Act and will be in the Green Books. So it has three sections, but really two kind of general standards related to searches. This first provision, subdivision A, just makes clear that there are a variety of kinds of searches, and that when we're talking about searches and standards for them, this language is intended to cover all of them. Subdivision or subsection B, to get used to talking about bill language again, subsection B is a general requirement that's actually in a federal standard. So DOC already does this, but this is putting it in state law. That DOC is not allowed to search or physically examine any individual for the sole purpose of determining the individual's genital status. Subsection C is
My question is regarding, you said it's a federal standard. Is it a rule? Is it a CFR something?
yes, it is. It's one of the prison rape
Okay, but it
elimination
just
Act
wasn't
standards.
referenced there. Okay, thank you.
But we're codifying it, so if that's changed those rules, we still have this in place, the old standard in place.
Correct. So I didn't talk about it in detail in the interest of the committee's time today, but one other thing that Act 117 does is requires as a matter of state law, not just federal law, that DOC continue to comply with the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act standards. And this is one of them. So were the federal government to remove that standard at the federal level, it would still be a requirement as a matter of state law for DOC to follow it. Happy to talk with anyone offline about some of those related reporting requirements in the bill or the act. This third subsection C is just a very general process standard to say that DOC has to consider on an individualized basis whether a transgender, gender diverse, or intersex individual's request as to the gender of staff who may perform a lawful search would best support the individual's health or safety, and whether accommodating that request would pose risks to safety or security. So in the housing placement section, there's a much more detailed process related to handling those requests. Has to be considered on an individualized basis. The department weighs health and safety and risk to safety or security, retains the ability to make decisions based on those considerations. But the search section does not contain anything as detailed as the housing section. And one of the reasons behind that was because the department, as I mentioned, was revising one of its relevant search policies at the time. And so the first Joint Justice charge is to consider that revised search policy, which I believe you'll be hearing about later this afternoon, and to consider whether any changes to the section warranted, either, I think, changes, additions, modifications, recommendations of any kind about whether this language is adequate and appropriate in light of that revised search policy. Any questions about that? Oh, I see.
It's all coming up to speed because we haven't thought about this for 2 months.
Right. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you say the individual's request, what does the request pertain?
Sure. So this is the danger of, I tried to shortcut walking through every provision of the bill, but this is a good callback. One of the parts of the bill that should be on your screen now, section 3, when someone enters the department's custody, they are required to give the individual the opportunity to identify their gender identity, and they can request the gender of staff who may perform a lawful search. So gender identity can come up in searches in at least a couple ways. It's for at least some kinds of searches, for example, search policies and standards specify who can search whom based on the sex or gender identity of the staff member doing the searching, which is part of why this idea of a request comes in. So The Act provides that process for an individual to identify this to the department, to make that request. It also allows them to make a similar request for a housing placement. And there's a more in-depth process for how the department is required to handle a housing placement request. For searches, there is just this provision that we looked at here that says individualized basis and considering what would best support the individual's health and safety and whether accommodating the request would pose risks to safety or security. So that's a little bit the nature of how the request comes in. It's pretty general how it's currently handled. I think if you have more specific questions about how the department operates this in practice, because this has been their general practice, I think that might be a great question for witnesses this afternoon, but happy to continue on this topic in any other ways.
Just a clarifying question.
Yes.
So the way I interpret that language is that the department could deny the request.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. For example, in the housing section,
Okay, before you get there, just back onto my first question, if it's okay, Teresa. So this section, this request is just for searches, and the reason I was wondering about that was how the searches and the housing are different, which I know we talked about this a couple months ago, but that's exactly my question. So when you say the department can not accommodate this request, it's on page 6 where you are now, but they have to have reasons too, right?
So helpful to understand you're connecting the search and the housing pieces here. For folks who maybe didn't see this in as much detail, I'm just going to go down to the housing section so you can see what kinds of additional language are referenced in the housing section. As Senator Harrison is flagging, there are some more requirements related to handling a housing placement request, including that the department has to provide reasons for why they did not accommodate a request. That kind of language is not in the search section, and that's part of the the requirement to submit the revised search policy and for the committee to consider whether in light of that policy, there's anything in the search section that should look more like the housing section, should not, whether it's fine as is. And there was some discussion in the committees of how these topics were different in some ways. So it doesn't necessarily follow that they have to be treated with the same language by any means. But in this housing section, it talks about the multidisciplinary review panels that review housing placement decisions in DOC. It requires an individualized basis, but it provides a little bit more language around how the department has to consider the request. So the department shall give serious consideration to the inmate's classification or housing placement request. But if the department finds that accommodating the inmate's request would pose an unreasonable risk to institutional safety or security, the inmate's health or safety, or the safety or security of other inmates or staff, the department may decide that it cannot accommodate the request. And if it does so, it has to document in writing a specific reason that it's unable to accommodate the request. So that language is in the bill related to housing placement requests. That specificity of language is not in the bill relating to searches and requests regarding the gender of the staff who would perform a search. And I think your witnesses this afternoon who speak on this topic will be able to explain some of the practical or functional reasons why this bill kind of divided consideration of search and housing requests. Some different things involved. But I don't mean to reference this afternoon's witnesses as a block to your questions to me, just to say that they can speak to the practicalities of it much better than I can.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this one?
Just a quick question, and it's probably something I should ask the department. And I guess I'm looking to see, because this first time I'm looking at this in this detail. on page 7 where it's in, subparagraph 2, where it talks about making the determination based on an objective basis. Is objective basis defined anywhere in this bill?
It's not. I think the discussion at the time was that this is a way of capturing that there should be objective rationales for it. So not assumptions about how people may or may not react to a placement request. I think is an example of something that this would exclude. But there was discussion of how to select the right language there. So
I'll ask the
good
department how they're doing.
question.
I think one of the thoughts is, in our world, sometimes correctional officers can make a decision. And we've seen this in terms of earned time in the past, where it was very subjective. If a person received earned time or not, based on some of the personnel's, like correctional officers or supervisors' decisions. And we wanted to take it away from that subjective view.
No,
That was the
I get
reason.
the use of the term objective. It's just, it's, objective sometimes can be in the eye of the beholder as well. So I just, does that mean that there's insufficient space, where, in terms of housing, there's not space in a particular unit or there, so I'll just be curious as to how they define objective.
So I have two questions here, or maybe comments. One is when you start talking about objective, then to me, it implies somehow there's some training that goes on with folks so that they can make an objective determination. And then the second issue that comes up is what, if any, training our health contractor has, and whether or not we've thought ahead about how this whole issue is handled before it starts. This is a question I think later for the afternoon, but training for staff so that they aren't put in a difficult situation and decision making, whether it's about space or requests, and then whether or not our health contractor has information or is educated in this area as well.
Great. With an eye on time, I'll move us forward to gender affirming medical care, and I will be brief to keep us on schedule. So this is the document that Chair Emmons referenced, titled version 1.3. This was an early draft of H550, and it was the last draft to contain language related to medical care. So it is just something for the committee to reference if useful, that this was some of the thinking at the time related to medical care. This is in no way binding on the committee, of course. It's just something to use if and as useful. So as I mentioned, early drafts of the bill contained this medical care language, and you'll have witnesses later today who can speak much more to the current practices related to gender affirming care. But I'll just, so you have a sense of where the committee's mind was when they tasked Justice Oversight with continuing this work. This draft language covers, I think, a few main things, although I'm happy for witnesses to follow to expand on what I'm flagging now. There was the idea that the department's healthcare providers should be equipped to identify gender affirming care needs upon admission into a correctional facility, and to provide gender affirming care, connect folks with the right resources. This language was intended to cover at least that. And I think this language was also trying to cover the idea that inmates should have access to all necessary and appropriate medical care, including gender affirming care. So there was discussion among witnesses and the committee about how this language related to current practices, and that some of this language would likely need to be modified in light of how gender affirming care is provided and some of the funding or other implications of how that's done. But you'll have witnesses later today who can speak much more to that. But I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of, this is where this committee was aware. This is where House Corrections had left off on this topic. And so I wanted to make sure you had that as a reference in diving back into this topic. We're diving into this topic for the first time for some. Any questions about that? I've only gone 1 minute over time, so
That's fine. That's fine. I'm sure we're
keeping
gonna
us on our
have
schedule.
more than that. Any questions for folks?
I do have one quick question here, and a lot of my questions I have will be based on the witnesses this afternoon, but when you talk about the agenda affirming care and so on and so forth, if someone enters the facility, okay, before they have been to court or whatever, what's the time frame where, is this something that they have to have been involved in prior to coming to the correctional facility? Already involved in gender affirming care, or once they're there, they say, oh, now I want to get into this program, at the state's expense and so on and so forth. But at what point in time would the state have to follow this protocol as far as they're just waiting trial, they haven't been convicted of anything? When does that start or not?
I'll definitely defer to the department and WellPAP this afternoon to speak more to how medical care is provided. I'll just flag two things. Gender affirming care is generally kind of an umbrella term, so it can encompass a lot of things on a spectrum from using the right pronouns all the way to hormones or surgery. So it can cover a lot of things, as I understand it. And the rest of that I will leave to the department and its medical contractor.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank
Right.
you, Hillary.
course.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you've done to set the stage for our work over the next few months.
I'll be around all day.
And you'll be around next meetings.
Yes, this is true. Not just today.
So the next item on the agenda is really to hear a more in-depth discussion in terms of the language that was being proposed in H 550, and then where we ended up in the bill and voted and put into law under Act 117. We have a couple of folks with us. We have Representative Troy Hedrick, who spoke quite a bit, worked on this bill a lot during our committee discussion. And we also have Kalania April Bagby, who formerly incarcerated person. I don't know if Kalania, you also want to come up at the same time as Troy? It's to give, just for us to have a real conversation in terms of, Troy, what your thinking was, what you were in the committee, why we decided to not go into depth so much about it in the committee and put the work here for the Justice Oversight Committee. And Kalani, I think it would be really important for members to hear of a life situation and what occurred for you as a formerly incarcerated person. So I think if you were both up here at the same time, would be very helpful and engage in a conversation. So welcome, and if you both could identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Troy Hedrick. I'm a state representative for a portion of Burlington. And for the past 4 years have had the privilege of serving with the chair on the House Corrections and Institutions Committee.
My name is Kalani April Gagne, and I'd reached out to Troy in regards to concerns that I'd had regarding a better policy by the Department of Corrections. What I felt was a lack of a good policy in the procedures that they do. A lot of that was based on things that I witnessed while I was housed at Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. I spent 16 years incarcerated, and all of them were out-of-state facilities until I got back to Vermont, which were male. And they needed a better, as well as like I noticed the PREA was actually a lot of different language that wasn't in there before.
Does that mic amplify at all?
Not sure if it's on.
It may not be on. Does somebody have?
It's that's supposed to be on. It says on.
I think it's. Just hoping people can hear.
Can I continue while we work on this? Let me just, I'm going to start big with sort of why I introduced this bill and how it aligns with my personal and fundamental political philosophies. And then talk very specifically about the bill. It is my firmly held belief that we can become a society in which everybody has their basic needs met and in which everybody can live with dignity. That is my belief, and that is how I approach my legislative work. By fundamental needs, I mean, adequate food, adequate shelter, adequate healthcare. I include education in that, and again, in which people can live with dignity, especially folks who have been historically marginalized and often villainized. That is my belief. That is how I approach my legislative work. So when you place me on the House Corrections and Institutions Committee, I'm going to zero in on the world of corrections. And I think we, and I mean as a society, I don't mean Vermont, I don't mean the Vermont Department of Corrections. I think we have gotten incarceration incredibly wrong, and I think we continue to perpetuate harm with how we do incarceration. And I firmly believe that Vermont can be at the helm, at the forefront of improving on how we do incarceration. So when we as a state decide that we're going to use incarceration as a response to harm created by individuals, the state, in my belief, takes on the obligation of providing those basic needs: food, shelter, healthcare, and education. And I think Vermont does that incredibly well, the education part, especially as we partner with CCV. And I think we take on the obligation of treating people with dignity. And that includes folks who identify as transgender. That includes people who identify according to any marginalized identity. So just over a year ago, I think it was June, maybe, of 25. Was it August? So maybe a year ago. I received an email from Kalani, who said, "Hey, your name was given to me. I want to talk to you about what it's been like to be incarcerated for the past 16 years. Did not, with that email, identify herself as a trans woman. I said, absolutely, let's have lunch. We did that. And Kalani told me her story about what it was like to be a trans woman who lived almost exclusively in male facilities, incarcerated by the state of Vermont, lived out of state in male facilities. And then talked to me a little bit about what it was like to return, which is very, very typical as people are ending their sentence. They return to Vermont before being released. What it was like to return to CRCF. And I'm going to let Kalani tell her own story about all of that. But I was impacted to the point where I knew after that meeting that policy alone, departmental policy alone is probably not enough to guarantee that the state is treating people with dignity. So I wrote the legislation. Kalani came into our committee. It was evident to me that she had an almost immediate impact. And I was incredibly grateful to my fellow committee members who took that opportunity to really dig into the bill. And I know another member, Representative Galfetti, met with Kalani a few times after that as well, and became just a tremendous partner as we moved this bill forward. I want to say too that portions of this bill were sort of hard for me, and I want to talk a little bit about my other life. For those of you who don't know, my almost entire career has been spent in student services, student support services at the university level. I've worked a longtime staff member with the Division of Student Affairs at the University of Vermont. Very common for me to meet with students who need support as they're navigating their 4 years with us. In that world, when somebody comes to me and says, this is how I identify, I'm transitioning, these are my pronouns, this is how I want you to refer to me from now on, I'm having trouble with my family as I make these transitions. For me, as I've educated myself on how to work with those students, it is incredibly important for me to believe them and to treat them accordingly. These are my pronouns. Okay, those are the pronouns I'm going to use for you. This is what I want you to refer to me as. Okay, that's how I'm going to refer to you. So when Kalani came to me and said, oh, and by the way, we also have to talk about when people might be misusing that identity claim and how that misuse causes harm in the world of corrections, I had to really do a paradigm shift for myself, right? And that's what's at the heart of some of the accommodations in the bill that allow the Department of Corrections to factor in whether or not health and safety is going to be impacted if we choose to honor how this person is being asked to be referred to as, or what this person's identity is. When this world of identity intersects with the world of criminality, I think we do have to be cautious, more cautious than I've had to be in my life, where I can kind of believe by default. We do have to take into consideration instances where that sort of default belief might impact safety and security of people involved, and that there might be people who are disingenuous in why they're asking for housing that doesn't align with their presented identity. So that's why some of those safeguards are in there for maybe delaying or denying housing requests. That was a paradigm shift for me. We did spend a good amount of time on healthcare, gender affirming healthcare. We didn't get that across the finish line in our committee. That's why we transitioned into some of what's in the act as passed.
That's a great summary, Troy. Thank you. So let's transition.
She's got a much longer story to tell than I do.
To the mic. That will help.
So you'd like me to share part of my story?
Yes, that would be very, very helpful, just
Okay.
like you did within our committee. Very helpful.
So for me, my childhood dictated a lot. I mean, growing up, being born in 1966, and as a small child, probably from at least the age of 3 or 4, I knew I was never in the right body. And so, but there was no language for me to try to explain to anybody what it was. And that's when drugs was my only solace. And of course, with the drugs came criminal behaviors. And the reason I was incarcerated and received 25 to 40 years, suspended, but 16, was an aggravated assault, unlawful restraint, and taking the motor vehicle. And as soon as I was sentenced, I was shipped out of state. And right around, it was about 50 years old, I couldn't live as the person I was anymore. I had a plan to take my life in 3 ways, with buying medication off people so I could have enough pills. I had my razor blades and I had a noose. And I went to call my family and tell each one of them goodbye. And my sister, who has since passed, knew something was wrong because I don't say goodbye. And she said, I know you're not going to tell me, but remember, I love you. And my daughter was the last one that I called, and I could tell something was wrong. She had told her mother something in regards to her identity. And her mother had really didn't have good language for her. And I felt at this moment in time, I had to do something to protect my daughter. And I left her when she was 5 years old. So she's now 13. It's about halfway through my incarceration, I transitioned. And I told her I could sympathize and empathize with her. And she's like, well, there's a difference. Sympathy is my cat died. I'm sorry. So how do you identify with me? And I had to jump off that mental precipice into the abyss to save my child. And I told her, I said, what have I always said to you? Do you remember? And now that's 8 years for a 5-year-old. And she said, you told me to love myself, be proud of who I am. And that really hurt. That hurt because I know what I want to do. And that changed my life. She saved me in more ways than one when she said that to me, and she remembered that. And so I went to Pennsylvania. We were leaving Michigan, so it was no sense in trying to really establish anything there. So as soon as I got to Pennsylvania, I met with a psychiatrist there, with my caseworker, and told them that I identified as a woman. And their process there, which is the process of most states, is you go in front of a panel, as like is included in some of the language, you know, mental care providers or therapists or psychiatrists that have knowledge of gender dysphoria and working with inmates that are transgender. So you go in front of their committee and you talk to them, and they determine if you're going to get HRTs, hormone replacement therapy. And so I did, because I had evidence from the street of psychiatrists that I had worked with in regards to that. And I'd started on medication, the estradiol and spironolactone.
This is while you were incarcerated.
This is while I was incarcerated.
In Pennsylvania, when we were shipping Vermont inmates out of state.
Correct.
So you were a Vermont inmate and
Yes.
you were being housed in one of the out-of-state facilities we were contracted.
Yeah, when we were in Pennsylvania, technically we weren't Vermont inmates anymore because they interstate compacted every single one of us. So there were times like Vermont couldn't even come in because Pennsylvania would say, nah, you can't come in today.
So you were under Pennsylvania laws.
Yes, yes. So they did not have to follow any of Vermont Department of Corrections policy. The for-profit prisons that we were in, CCA and GEO, they had to follow Vermont DOC policy as if that was in the state of Vermont. But in Pennsylvania, they didn't have to follow that protocol. So their protocol, as like I mentioned in the last testimony, many states prior to our president's decision in regards to the Federal Bureau of Prisons was the same way. You need the diagnosis of gender dysphoria before you were going to be allowed to have HRTs. And so I was able to receive that in Pennsylvania. There was a couple of people that in the same committee were denied because they felt that they were confused and they needed to live as they were saying they're identifying as, and then come back and they would readdress it. So kind of move forward to Mississippi. Not a very good prison for a transgender woman. I literally had the unit manager tell me that she hated white people in my kind. And I said to her, well, I'm white, so what is my kind? Because I'm a Jew or because I'm a trans woman? And she goes, all three. And for me, being kind of the smart ass I am, I said, well, if I'd known that, I would have bought a ticket because I hit the trifecta. You know, and it was just kind of me trying to protect myself. This individual with Vermont DOC knowledge continued to put sex offenders in my cell. People who had been convicted of rape and obviously not feeling safe as a woman living with somebody like that. And it was my niece was a very fierce advocate in regards to getting where that could not be happening anymore. And I had a single cell, but they knew things were going on. When I first got there in October of 2018, shortly thereafter in November, my sister April was diagnosed with signet ring cell carcinoma, and she was given about a year to live. And so that was hard enough to deal with. And then dealing with all the insanity of the people in that jail and not having any protection because the staff did not care. And 3 days after she died is when my beatings and sexual assault started for close to 6 months. And due to that, you're left feeling less than human. I'd reached out multiple times to the Department of Corrections. I'd grieved it all the way up to then Commissioner Nicholas Demmel, and did not even have that grievance answered. I had begged to go back to Vermont to see my sister. I hadn't seen her in that point throughout at this point, almost 10 years incarcerated. I hadn't seen her and I wanted to go home. And Vermont DOC out-of-state caseworkers, in my words, said, it's not going to happen. You know, almost like I wasn't entitled to go back to Vermont. So she passed away. I never got to see my sister again. That was very hard. And then being abused at the same time, where you can't even grieve your sister because you're trying to protect yourself. And finally, when I did get back to Vermont, they housed me in Chittenden Regional Correctional Center, or CRCF. And things were vastly different there. Though in every male facility I was at, I was never once misgendered, and I was immediately misgendered once or 3 times by a lady within 5 minutes of being dropped off at Chittenden. And I said to the gentleman, I asked what his job was, and he said he was an S1, which I didn't understand because out of state they have sergeants, captains, lieutenants, and wardens. So I said, is it like he said, like a sergeant. I said, okay. I said, you haven't heard her misgender me? And he goes, no. So that's how it started. And there was no accountability for staff members that would misgender me. You didn't know me as my birth self. You only knew me and met me as Kalani April Ghani. So you're being stereotypical to me because I have a deeper voice, or maybe to you I look more masculine. So that's how you judged me. And going to people in that facility, the superintendent and assistant superintendent, and telling them, and the assistant superintendent at the time kind of just looked at me and said, well, you do have a very deep voice. So, and I didn't even know how to respond to that. You know, I've heard women that have deeper voices than me, you know, and it shouldn't matter what my voice sounds like. I asked she, her pronouns. The real concern was how I saw other transgender inmates behaving and acting, and the Department of Corrections not protecting cisgender women. And that was my concern, why I reached out to Troy, because I didn't come to fight for just transgender rights. I came to fight for everybody's rights as human beings to feel safe. Transgender individuals, while incarcerated, have the right to feel safe. But the cisgender women you're putting them with also have the right to feel safe. I think Vermont tried to be a little too progressive at first, and they didn't really do proper things. And that's why I wanted to reach out to Troy to hopefully get a better policy. You know, I like the language that I've read in regards to who makes these diagnoses. And because it's, like I had mentioned before, there could be other co-occurring mental health issues. Gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia are 2 night and day things. So there could be that going on. So to have the proper people do that. And so it was really difficult there. At one point, I was housed with a gentleman who proclaimed as a woman, and they put that person in a 4-person cell in house 2. And this gentleman looked like a spitting image of one of the men that had sexually assaulted me. And I went to staff, and they refused to move this individual. And this individual, at one point, kind of like ripped their shirt off and was like prostrating in front of me, threatening me. And it wasn't until the chief of security at the time that came back. I think he was up at central office for a little bit, came back, and I told him, and he knew the person that did that out of that cell. But I had to stay awake for 60 hours to feel safe. That was my journey to the Department of Corrections in Chittenden. Though I offered many times to I would love to give an in-service or at least talk to COs in regards to what it feels like to be misgendered and why it's important to use that. There was always, they just made a mistake. Mistakes are usually followed with a sorry or some kind of acknowledgement that you misgendered me, but there wasn't that. So I wasn't really, the only difference was I felt safe from physical assault and a sexual assault. I felt safe there. And I would go to some of the staff in regards to how some of the transgender inmates were behaving. And there really wasn't a lot of oversight. I mean, some of them would spend like 2 days in the, what we call the box segregation, and that was it. And that was concerning to me because you have a group of people, cisgender women, who've already been victimized. They've been maybe beaten, they've been trafficked, they have a lot of things going on in their mental thing. And then you allow predators to come in to the facility that I feel could have been more properly vetted. That was my concern because when I was housed at Chittenden at the time, every person that identified as a transgender was a sex offender. And it was very concerning to me that I don't feel like how much you could have given weight. You didn't look at their institutional records and how they behaved in a sexually predatory behavior in the male facilities. And that's part of like, I see that needs to be weighed into it. That needs to be like one of the biggest things. And sadly, that wasn't there. There's people that in the time frame I was there, one person committed over at least 13 Prius and just continued to just either get moved to another unit, spend maybe a few days or a week in segregation, and then be released. There were some that they did send back in regards to their behaviors. And beginning of this year, they sent that individual back. And within 3 months, this person is now back at Chittenden. I find hard if Vermont Department of Corrections followed that policy, that you really had a good overview in all these professionals meeting with this person and seeing if their behavior has changed. So that's concerning. You are the Justice Oversight Committee of the Department of Corrections. And sadly for me and it's every correctional facility. It's not like just Vermont, and it's sometimes Vermont DOC just couldn't do what they want to do. And it's sad that it has to be that way, because what about this person now going back and other people that aren't properly vetted to go back to the facility and prey upon people? That's why I had sent Megan the Colorado thing that Colorado is looking into doing, like having a transgender housing unit in one of the male facilities. Because if you don't meet the qualifications to be housed with women, then we can have, it's not a mandatory unit, it would be voluntary, that if you don't feel safe in general population, then you can go there. They're not going to segregate you as in direct, then you could go out to rec with the rest of the population, but you would be housed in that secure unit so you could feel safe. I thought that myself would be a very good idea for Vermont Department of Corrections. That way there, through that process, you can really see even more how people are carrying themselves. If you don't feel safe, then that's the alternative. You can go there. You don't have to, but you can. And I think there's a really good opportunity for Vermont DOC to look into, and do that as a policy. Yeah, I was really happy when I was able to meet with Troy and voice my concerns and feel heard, feel seen, feel understood. And that was very different in my life because that's never happened before. And knowing everything that went on with me and everybody, the Department of Corrections, prisoners' rights knew, and nobody caring about you, you continue that shame from childhood that you're not worthy to be seen or heard, or you're not worthy to be protected. And that deeply affects you. And I wanted to make change for other people. I want it to be where cisgender women can feel safe with the people that identify as transgender or transgender woman. And I think DOC really needs to, I'm not sure the number, really needs to follow that with the people that know gender dysphoria. Some of the testimony I listened to was kind of difficult because they weren't being forthright at times. There's not a stigma. One of the things was there's not a stigma in regards to a man in a man facility saying, I'm just going to say I'm a woman and go there, because they've done that. I lived amongst people that would say that, and people did end up getting there that said that. So it's not a stigma that happens. And I think that's, trying to, I don't know, I'm not sure what I would call that. It's just very disheartening that you try to do those things. And for me, as I said, I really would love to see the Vermont Department of Corrections do a peer support program. I was invited by Commissioner Murad to go up and do that presentation in Waterbury. I feel, especially as a transgender woman, being able to go into a facility and talking to other transgender people and having that connection through shared lived experiences. This is all of this is lived experience for me. It's not politics. It's nothing. It's just strictly lived experiences that I went through. And I'm very happy that I was able to give testimony to the House committee and the Senate committee. And then it passed on the Senate floor. And so much that it was passed overwhelmingly because I felt like I was really heard and I represented everybody that I wanted to also be heard that couldn't be there to give testimony. And I just really thank the committee, all of the committees, the Senate, the House, and the Senate for really looking at this as something that is important. I always have a problem with, I think Vermont can sometimes be a leader. Don't wait to see what other states do. You can also look into doing the transgender housing to make people feel safe if they wouldn't qualify to go there. I think that's important. I think that they do need proper education and training in regards to transgender individuals and having sensitivity training in regards to using the proper pronouns. And that doesn't happen sometimes. And I think it can, with proper training, you can do that. I mean, I'd love to do an in-service for correctional officers in regards to working with them. It's not about replacing anything. It's about working together to make something better. As Troy said, our prison systems are very outdated, all of them across this country. And they're through the progressiveness in order to protect all. I understand that these policies need to be set, enacted into law, and be followed, to a T. People, I'd like to see people who commit PREAs, like you should be removed from the facility. That you cannot behave and not be continually rewarded for that.
Bonnie, I want to thank you for your testimony during the session as well as today, because it really did lead to this particular law, because we wanted to really start working with DOC to instill some of the recommendations that you put on the table. Because some of it they would say, well, it's in our policy, it's in our directives, but how enforceable is it? That's why we did put in some of these items, particularly the housing piece, particularly we'll work on the searching piece. And hopefully we'll get into a little bit more about the healthcare piece to really put it in our statutes. So regardless of who is there in corrections, either within central office or even residents who are incarcerated, will be protected by the law.
Yeah.
That's the goal. Are there questions of either Troy or Melania from the committee members?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank both of you for being here and sharing this evolution and story. And Kalania, and I chair the House Human Services Committee, so we hear from people with lived experience quite a bit. And it is always remarkable to me how the ability of somebody to share their lived experience can change the mindset of people who haven't really thought about an issue or considered it from multiple viewpoints. Makes a difference. And so your desire to want to make a difference and to have all people treated with dignity, I think is really helpful. And I just want to say thank you for stepping forward and trying to make change.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Thoughts? So part of our work is really going to be looking at the healthcare. And we'll be working on getting DOC in as well as WellPAC. And you folks would be more than welcome to come back.
Yeah.
That.
I think that in regards, what I forgot to mention is the gender care in regards to that, like having electrolysis for a transgender woman, that's not cosmetic. That is a necessity to live your life authentically, who you are. To have electrolysis so you can have bottom surgery is a necessity, and no surgeon would perform it without that being done. You know, so I think while people are there, I mean, I was housed for 16 years. You know, I started almost 3 years after I transitioned to try to get these things done, but I was housed out of state. And then coming back, I believe I only had, I think, 4 electrolysis appointments, and that was it. And generally, when you do electrolysis, you're supposed to go every week to have that done. And so I think for people, even if like I just gotten out and had electrolysis, like I have to, you know, I have Medicaid and they will cover it. But that could have been a step that could have been dealt with while I was there and housed. And so that's very important that that piece of that part of gender care happens for people as well.
I'm gonna pick up a little bit on what Senator Norris asked, and what you experienced, Claudia, not within so much yourself, but what you saw for other folks when they were transitioning. I think some folks may think, oh, it just happens automatically, or one day you wake up and say, oh, okay, I'm gonna transition. Can you help us understand more what the process really would be and what you saw of some folks that were in some of your fellow inmates that were in transition? Did it happen all of a sudden? Were they transitioning prior to coming into corrections to the facility while they were there? Just in general, if you could just give us a highlight.
Yeah, I think there were some that when they came into corrections, like myself, I was about 8 years in when I had to transition to live. And there are other people that have transitioned as well while they were in there. I think there was only 1 or 2 that had started their transition while they were outside, and then they were incarcerated. And there is a process for it. You can't, it's like, you know, you just don't wake up and say, like, hey, I don't want to wear Nikes today, I'm gonna wear my Adidas. It's deeply, you know, psychological. It's who you are. And to try to be able to vocalize that and share that with people, it's difficult. And the process of you doing it isn't or shouldn't be, okay, well, we're just gonna give you the hormones. I think there needs to be that engagement of why a lot of the other states have where you need to have that diagnosis of gender dysphoria in order to get the medications. Yes, DOC needs to take people at face value when they say something, but that's where that vetting comes in. So when you're transitioning through jail, I mean, some people won't take the hormones or the blocker. There's some that do start on HRTs. And then when you're doing that, like you kind of start transitioning and things start activating and growing, you know? And so it's hard when you're even in a female facility while you're transitioning and going through that. And I think for me, watching other people do that, some of them, their transitions were similar to mine, very difficult. You know, how do you tell your family? You know, how do you do these things? All that factors into it. But mental health, psychiatry, psychologist, all that plays huge in being able to give that proper care for a transgender individual.
Very helpful. Thank you. Anything else? from committee members? Thank you both for coming in. Really appreciate it. We are going to be working on this.
So Alice, yeah, folks, and I really appreciate your sharing your, what you've been through. It's not easy, and to transition as an adult is different from transitioning as a child. And I think people understand the transition, maybe a little bit better when we're talking about children, or pre-puberty. And you transitioned post-puberty, and that is significantly different. The issue we also have is that there aren't a lot of experts. You, it sounds like you were lucky to have psychiatric care and medical care that understood gender affirming care and gender dysphoria. We don't have the huge expertise that is always required, but so it is something that I think our committee will have to talk about again, along jointly, obviously, with judiciary, and others. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from committee members? Thank you both. Really appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Very helpful. Thank you. And this afternoon, we'll also be talking with corrections at 12:30. And you're more than welcome if you can to stay, or you can always watch us on YouTube after the fact. Yeah. So we're pretty much on schedule, believe it or not. We've got an update from a whole slew of folks of the Department of Buildings and General Services. So I will start with the commissioner. So come on up, Commissioner, and you brought with you a whole slew of people. Some I recognize and some I. And then just to let you know, this afternoon, we're gonna have an update from DCF at 1:30. They couldn't make it today at this time, they can make it at 1:30, so you're more than welcome.
To come back or watch it online.
So you're right, to
Yes.
watch that or come back. So welcome, Commissioner, if you could identify the group of.
I'll be happy to. So first of all, Wanda Manoli, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. And we're really looking for the opportunity for us to provide an overview of the work that we've done. And I just want to give a thank you again to the members of all of the committees that support the Justice Oversight. You know, you worked really closely with us to help us find a method to move forward and keep working on this project. And I just really, really appreciate that. So today, myself and Andrew Martin, who is Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Andrew Martin, I'm the CEO of Negley & Chase.
Who is representing the construction element for the developer.
Which is Grandview Farms, who is the landowner, and we are working as the design builder for Grandview in partnership.
So I think just to lay the foundation for this for folks who haven't lived this.
Just a minute, did you say Grandview Farm?
Grandview Farms.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we need to pull this
I
closer?
don't know if that mic is even working that well.
Oh, maybe.
We have entered into an agreement with a developer to design and build this facility on their own property. We will not be owning the building. We will not pay to build the building. We will be paying lease payments to the developer, and that's all gonna be developed in negotiations between BGS. I'm assuming a little bit of DCF, because I don't know which budget will come out of the DCF budget for those lease payments. And then in our world, those dollars come from the appropriations committee, the general fund. So we will not be owning the building, and we will not be using state dollars to build the building. Just to lay that foundation.
we'll use state dollars for the lease, which does cover some of the building costs, but yeah, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. So yes, excellent summary. Thank you. I'm just going to turn quickly. I think you know most of our team members. So if you all just want to do a name and what your role is, it'll be easier than me. We'll start with Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Sidney, Deputy Commissioner of BGS. It's nice to see many of you again, and meet you if you haven't been before.
Cole.
Phil Barney, Communications and Legislative Affairs for BGS. Nice to see you all.
So Joe, I'm going to let you go and then you can control the back of the room there.
Joe Agent, I'm the Director for Design and Construction of BGS.
Warren Washburn, Program Chief of BGS.
James Joseph, Program Chief. Design and Construction.
Sabrina Parrish, Project Manager for Design and Construction.
So there's just really quickly, I just want to point out, Sabrina and I, we were talking about it. So she is our project manager, our architect that works really on AHS projects, which are all familiar with. And we were just talking about the length of time around this project and other ones. So I think she's pretty happy to be here today and see the movement that's happening. And if I could just take a moment, because we've talked about this in the past, and I have permission to share with you. Director Aja has decided to retire from state government in January. So you may get a little bit of him in January, but he's doing a phenomenal job working with Emily and I and his team on transferring knowledge and really mentoring and really bringing his team up to a place to serve us and to support BGS, but also, you know, the roles and the amount of time that we spend in your committee. So it's a congratulations.
Perhaps.
So,
We'll see.
okay, so thank you for letting me do those public announcements. So I'm gonna move right on. We're gonna go to a PowerPoint that Cole will be driving, but I just want to say to you that we're here today because again, we had an opportunity to work together and to build a relationship in reporting the plans on developing what we are calling now the Green Mountain Youth Facility or Center. And so this is the first of our presentations to you. I think it's important to just share with you, and you all know this, you know it better than I do, that this is our third attempt to find a suitable location. And that, and one of the things we really, when we weren't able to move forward with the last proposal, we really took some time internally to say, where are the roadblocks? And part of the roadblocks were just on leading the discussions, especially with our communities. And so what we really shifted in this proposal is having the developer become more of a partner and leading some of the conversations. In this case, it's South Burlington and some of the permitting. And we're feeling very good about that business decision, and we're seeing the project advance. As we talked about, it's a build-to-suite lease. It shifts the responsibility of permitting, development, construction to the developer. Once the building's ready for occupancy, we enter into a long-term lease. That long-term lease does give us an option to buy if we so choose. We have not negotiated any elements of that right now. There's just a standard sort of form and function that we follow. And then we and we've already introduced Negley and Chase, so I'm going to go right to the PowerPoint. And this is this is where we are. So in October of 25, we did an open RFP for a build to suit for the Green Mountain Youth Center. We've talked about the developers to design, build, and lease the secure facility. And the developer owns and maintains the facility and the land and leases this back to the state. And within that, one of the elements we're working on is, are there pieces of maintenance that BGS wants to have oversight? Are there pieces that the developer is going to take? And that's still further down the road that we are working on, because you can be all inclusive with the lease, or you can separate some of it, like maybe we want to have oversight on systems, and I'm just using that as an example. In November, we closed the RFP. The conceptual estimate at that time was $27 million. And I think what's really important here is it was based on the previous project concepts. And I think Andrew may talk about it. So we started with that and really reprogrammed. So it was based on the previous designs and responding to the RFP in that way. It outlined the key terms and estimated costs for a full service lease. In December, BGS and DCF selected the Grandview Farms and Negley and Chase proposal. I think there were one or two other proposals, and I'm just going to make this really short and sweet. They weren't responsive. So we had to really work with Negley and Chase.
One of my questions is whether you had any other responses to the RFP.
I think one of them, and my memory may not be doing me well, so I may have to turn to my team. I think one of them pulled out and the other was not responsive. No, I'm getting a this. Go ahead.
There was one other one that was not responsive.
Okay. So then where we are at, then in March of 26, we began the design phase, and the developer advanced to us conceptual design that was provided in November. We outlined the major cost drivers of both construction and operational costs, and the group tasked with evaluating, testing the program. And there was a group tasked with doing all of that work. And I just want to step back to my bullets. I think, one of the things that we did, and we were meeting every Friday. I think now we're backing off because we're at a different place, but we had representatives and leadership from BGS and from DCF and working with Negley and Chase and the developer and their architect. We were spending Friday mornings going through programming, looking at space. We were all doing this in the same room and having the same conversation. And we've really built a very good working relationship. And I think that's really important, instead of just having the architect go over here and design something and bring it back. It was very collaborative. And I think that's important for the committee to hear. So at this point, I am going to stop and I am going to turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Let's ask a couple questions before we do that. So you talk about the lease change, the option to buy. Does lease also have an option to leave the lease, and under what conditions? So if we decide, 8, 9 years from now that there's a better way to do this and we have invested in that way, what are the options to keep the lease?
I think in the RFP, I think it was 5-year, 10, and 20.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of flexibility if
That's right.
something.
So those are decision points of by which time the state would have to inform you about what their plans are.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it could be vice versa too. If I remember the way the RFP was, yes.
And maybe you're going to touch on this, but with Virgin, zoning was an issue, and varied public community was an issue. So I'm just wondering about zoning. Is this zoning zoned for the purpose that we are using it?
Exactly. It is zoned as a group home, which is both by state statute and by the city of South Burlington. So it fits perfectly with the zoning ordinance. We just recently finished our initial meeting, which is called Sketch Plan, which we decided to bring the project to the DRB, the Design Review Board with South Burlington, to get their feedback. It's non-binding. It went great. There were 2 questions from the public, very simple. No substantial changes at all, just feedback from that group. So it's gone very smoothly. And you'll see in the timeline here, we submit for the actual application for planning and zoning permit early September of this year. So it's gone very smoothly so far.
And maybe I see that there's some schematics here. I'm not familiar with the location, but maybe when you get to the site plan schematic there, maybe you can tell us like what surrounds the building and the general area. Thank you.
let me start with just sort of the project update. As the commissioner said, we've been working for about, I think, 10 meetings in total with DCF, BGS, and our group, with the architects that are working with us, collaborative approach. And we looked at the whole programmatical aspect of the project and tightened things up wherever we could. And I think it actually worked quite well. So we improved the space efficiency of those programs. And again, working with DCF, we also have a firm that's working for Duncan Wisniewski, who is a local architect by the name of Trainer. And this is their background. The secure youth facilities is what they specialize in. We reduced the square footage of the building in that process. Also reduced the amount of exterior area of buildings by combining buildings, which helped on the cost side of things and also had some operational impact as well. And we'll talk about those. And in this effort, and the real focus is reducing staffing, because the operation cost of the facility is a significant part, much more so than the overall construction. So in that process, in bringing buildings together and moving things around in a campus setting, and we'll show the site plan in just a moment, we were able to centralize staffing. So at one point, there's a treatment building and a stabilization building. We put the two of them together, and the two groups of staffing are now just one to feed either side of that building. So that was a lot of the effort. The other example, and there are numerous of them, the intake portion. So when a youth comes to the facility, they come into a secure spot, Sallyport, then they're brought into the facility. We took that intake portion and moved it over to those two buildings that we just talked about, utilized that staff for the intake, as opposed to having a separate staff member have to go across campus, meet the sheriff, do the intake work, and then bring them back over. So those are a lot of the focuses, not only just building costs, but staffing costs. And I think that the DCF group will talk more about that this afternoon.
They will. And if I could just add, because I know this is important, in our conversations and working with DCF and BGS, but it's also the administration and working with Sarah Clark, the Secretary of Administration. We have a proposal. And, when we look at it, we look at the costs. We too, just like you, asked us to really look at the building costs and the operational costs to see how we can do enhancements for improvements that will bring that down. And that's some of the work that Andrew is summarizing.
So at the completion of what we call schematic design, and it is quite schematic, we did a new estimate. So we were originally in the original proposal of November of last year, we were 27 million. We're down $1.4 million. And that is a reflection of all of that work, which I think was great. Understand that the proposal had some very limited amount of drawings, but if you look at what was originally designed and what we've utilized, the components are still there. It's just that much more efficient. So on to the next slide is the site plan. And I think this will be helpful because the floor plans are still in flux. The site, to your question, is in South Burlington off of Heinsberg Road. And it's very close to the bridge over 89. If anybody's familiar where Tilly Drive is, where all of UVM's medical facilities are. Meadowland Business Park is down the hill, and this is very remote. It's off the corner of the site. It has no residential abutters. There's a solar field to the right of the floor of the plan, and forested area to the top of the page. So it's, again, fits perfectly with the zoning, and it's quite remote. And we think that's probably one of the reasons why we only had 2 participants in the initial DRB proposal. So it is a campus concept. And I'll just quickly, the 2 buildings that I spoke of, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I just so you know, campus isn't a word that we like to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
And wrong term. And we're not using it in any of the applications. It's not a campus.
It's just a trigger because, and it's not necessarily positive to me that there's not residential nearby when we're talking about something classified as a group home. And so I get it. I'm happy that there's not going to be a lot of zoning issues. But I have some more questions, probably more for DCF in terms of, operations and, even the initial look at the outside of the building looks very institutional to me. And I don't know what kind of feedback, I don't know if during your design process and this process that you talked to the Office of Child, Youth and Family Advocate, for instance, it would be helpful to hear maybe some of those details about whether you have or you haven't. And I know that they don't believe the facility is necessary, but since we are moving ahead with the building of it, I want to make it as less traumatizing as possible, and as therapeutic as possible. So use some terms like Sally Port and things like that.
Understood. And I backing up.
It's not a correctional facility.
Right. And that's exactly what we've done here, is that it is a residential aspect of the treatment and stabilization buildings. It looks very residential in elevation. It's pitched roofs. It looks like two good-sized houses. The front of the space, the administrative building, the recreational box, and the education building. Education has a pitched roof as well. So there is a real drive to a therapeutic setting. There are walking paths. We've been through this in a lot of detail to facilitate that concept of not an institutional correctional facility whatsoever. So I think that the DCF folks can talk to that quite well. They also have engaged with the working group that has had that input.
Yeah, I would say hearing from that working group, separately, they actually don't feel like they've been engaged in that process, but that's not your.
That isn't, but we're all here collaboratively trying to work that out. So we need to improve that.
Yeah.
But again, we've got about 3 acres of open space. There's a basketball court, central courtyard. And we've tried to minimize, to go back to your concern about the correctional aspect, we do have a architecturally sort of element in that fencing that goes around the right side on the screen, which is required, but very attractive, does not look like a correctional facility. Any questions about the floor plan or the site plan at all?
So where you see the dotted red line, that would be is that the boundary or is that where there'll be fence?
No, the fencing is right around the basketball court.
Okay,
I see
so
the
it's
black
the
line.
black.
The red line is actually the limitations of the wetland, because this is all open and grassland outside of that, which makes the site really very sort of, it used to be farmland. So it's in the middle of an open area with wetlands on either side. And that's the restriction of what we have for the boundaries of the site, is that perimeter that you see.
Are you gonna have to go through Act 250 for this at all?
There is an existing Act 250 permit in place with the park. We have an amendment, which is very straightforward. So the 2 permits are the City of South Burlington and the zoning permit. And the other permit is at the state level with Act 250 amendment. The wetland delineation has been done and signed off by DEC, so that's all done. It's really just putting together the stormwater permit and submitting that. It's fairly straightforward.
And is there a city water and sewer to this or?
Yeah, there is GMPs right in the street. We have gas. It's an all-electric heat pump facility, but there is a kitchen involved. So we have natural gas to the kitchen. There is a sanitary system that we connect to. There's fiber and there's copper. So all the utilities are there. Any other questions on the site plan?
So does combining the treatment and the stabilization buildings, does that change at all the look of the residential field outside the building?
It doesn't. And unfortunately, we just have the 2 elevations that were generated. We'll get to those for a second, but no, it doesn't. It still has the pitched roof. The center part is flat because of the mechanical systems that have to be on the roof. But that's in the back of the building. The pitch building, it's got both a pitched roof element, and then a flat portion of overhang. So we have natural light in the morning coming up from the east into the bedrooms. And then what is called the grand rooms, where the youth assembles, the front of the building is on the west side, and those have windows that face the west, which is primarily when the activities occur.
So if they were to, access services or educational piece, would they go to the administrative and educational building for services, or is that going to be provided to them in their living units? I'm assuming that the stabilization and the residential buildings are the living units.
Those are the bedrooms, so it's the residential aspect. And they're either going to the education building, which is the one that's on the left of the drawing, or in the gymnasium, or the recreation facility, which is part of that front administrative block. And DCF would be able to tell you a little bit more about how they're moving students, what the programs are. But we have taken in those program requirements in the design.
So when a person's being dropped off by law enforcement, where do they go on this design? Where would the law enforcement?
So they come in through the main entrance where the parking lot is and travel around the drive lane that you see that goes around the backside of the stabilization building. And that is where the intake is.
Okay.
And that was, again, at one point, part of the administrative block. We pulled that out, put it in between the stabilization and treatment buildings so that the staff is there if there's a transport after hours and what have you. So the sheriff's department comes in and parks on that side of the building.
And would visitors be allowed to come in to visit the youth? And where would that be occurring? And the security for that, for folks coming in to visit?
In the administrative wing, there are visiting areas and a controlled environment so that families or council can come and meet in conference rooms that are in the administrative building. And there's protocols in terms of how to get folks in and out, but that would happen in the administrative building.
You know, so this picture, then I'm going to this picture here.
Yeah, that's the.
I'm assuming this is the administrative building.
That's the entrance, yes, that is on the right side of the page. And what you're looking at is the pitched roof of the education building. And this was an early rendering. Things have changed a bit. But it is very residential in appearance. The siding is very much tied into the surrounding and so forth.
So the building on the left with the pitch is the education.
That's the education building,
It's
yeah.
not the living units. Do the living units?
Look very similar to that.
Yes.
Yep. All set on the rendering?
I have a question.
Wendy?
Yes, thank you. Did you consider, just given that this is from farmland or there is farmland, any animals or places where kids could grow things? Because I think that can be pretty restorative. Did you talk about that in any of your conversations?
Well, I think that's probably a question for DCF in terms of the operation of the facility. It's a good suggestion, but I would take it up with that group at the 1:30 meeting.
Okay. Thanks.
I mean, it looks like the only outdoor activity would be the courtyard or is that a basketball court?
In the basketball court. And again, talk with the folks from DCF, but there was also discussion about taking youth outside and walking on the natural path that is there. There's a right of way that's been created by the city of South Burlington for an open path that is in the front and the back side of the building. But that's an operational question that you should ask them. All right, and so just a quick follow-up. We had some significant cost drivers that we tackled. And just go through those quickly. we've got a combination of physical security and therapeutic space, trauma-informed design to support the safety and the rehabilitation. So it's a challenging building. It is not what you would think of as being a home. It can't be. But I think the team has done a great job of trying to make it look as residential and therapeutic and welcoming as possible. So with those challenges, this is not a standard commercial construction project. The materials really can't be used in a secure facility. So we've got some very specialized equipment, hardware, hardening of surfaces, but still with that residential aspect of it. And that has driven costs up. And we're doing everything we can to reduce that, but there is a compliance that we need to adhere to for the safety of the youth. As an example, an exit crash bar, if you can believe it, is $10,000 just because of the design and the institutional aspect of that crash bar so that it can't be used to hurt either the youth or the staff. And that's just the nature of the project. So with that, turn it over to any questions.
Well, so do we want?
Oh, I'm sorry, the timeline. Yeah.
Well, so the current status, we,
My apologies.
That's
Sticky
okay.
fingers.
go ahead.
So on the current status, we finished the schematic design effort. That was the estimate that we did. That was the 1.4 in savings. We've kicked off the new phase of design, which is called design development. We've been working behind the scenes. We're re-engaging with the group again, DCF and BGS, to continue to reduce those potential savings and the operational costs. We've done a significant amount of community outreach, which is really important in a project like this. And I think we have done a nice job of getting the support from the city council, the DRB. We've had meetings with the police department, with the fire department. They are all on board and embrace the project. And that's going to continue. We've been putting together the typical frequently asked questions about the projects to try to make sure that there aren't any rumors that this is, a correctional facility, because it's very easy to interpret it that way, and it's not. So we've had a lot of interface with public, and I think you've probably seen a pretty limited amount of publicity, I think a large degree because of that messaging. So we will continue that throughout the process when we have a really public process with DRB and the application for the zoning. So Cole, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to the next slide and apologize. Very hard to read, but this is the timeline, and I'll walk through it very quickly. We are obviously now the 1st of August. We are working through with the DCF group over the month of August with 4 meetings, very specific detailed meetings. We're submitting to both state at the Act 250 amendment and the planning and zoning in September. And then we're progressing through the design. We'll do another estimate at the end of design development. Then we will again do a 50% estimate as the drawings progress into what we call CDs or contract documents. And then the project goes out to bid. And then we have an established GMP, which informs the lease costs. And then we're off into construction. Everything goes smoothly in the spring of next year.
So, because it's so tiny and I don't have my glasses with me. Can you tell me when the design is complete, and then that would be helpful.
We are essentially completed early December with the construction documents.
Okay.
But the design itself, in terms of all of the partitions and the details and so forth, are really wrapping up in November.
Got it.
And then we're just finalizing the documents and, constructability input and so forth. But the end of November is approximately when the design is done.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
And I just would like to add, I think we are looking at, I was just looking at mine, it's about a 17-month.
14
14-month
month duration.
schedule, which I know we've talked about on other projects, Representative Emmons. So this is we are on task. We are
Yeah.
on schedule, and you will see what that looks like.
So I want some clarity. Your construction documents will be completed in February of 27.
Those are the final CDs that go out
Will
to
go
bid.
out to bid.
Yeah.
End of February, beginning of March.
Right.
Next year. And then you hope to start construction in April of next year.
Correct.
Is it a year and a couple of months for construction?
It's 14 months.
14 months.
Yeah.
So what we see from April to June, that is April of 27 to June of 28.
Right, that's the 14-month duration. Yeah.
So you're going out to bid end of February, first part
Right.
March.
And we're actually trying to improve when we go out to bid because the marketplace is better if we can hit January.
Yes.
And I think we will be able to do that. A lot of this obviously is driven to the extent by permits. Feedback from the permit process.
Is there gonna be delays, do you think, in supplies, in the supply chain at all?
No, things have gotten better, and we will pre-order as we need to in case there's anything, long lead items like generator.
Right.
Switch gear.
Yep.
But for the majority of things, and there are some specialized, the windows are an item, you know, they're complicated because of the security aspect. But we'll make sure we're ordering those so they arrive on time as the building gets enclosed.
You can order those based once you start construction. Do you really, or when, you really, can you do that before you go out to bid?
We can if we have to. And there may be an instance like the generator, but 14-month duration from start to finish
Construction.
should provide us enough time at that first initial couple of months, if any long lead items. We don't see anything that's longer than 14 months at this point, so we should be in good shape. The reason why you're seeing a February bidding process is because we allowed enough flexibility if there's a reason permits get delayed for whatever. But so far, it seems like it's on track and the momentum is quite good.
So are the buildings, I didn't even think to ask this, are they just single floor or are they?
It's all single story because of the climbing requirements. We're at 14 feet and up for roof overhangs and things like that. So the buildings are fairly tall, but they're all single story slab on grade. There are no basements.
No basement.
No.
I don't know what climbing requirements.
I remember back to my youth, I climbed like crazy. We don't want people climbing and getting up on the roof or out over the fence.
Just the higher you
So
go.
anti-climb 14 feet, and we've had some comical moments where people standing on shoulders is less than 14 feet. Believe me, they try it, they do it. So everything has a very high ceiling height as well as the roof lines around the perimeter of the building, so they're 14 feet.
Are we gonna get to see some schematics of what the inside might look like?
We're close, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think so. This is where we're, to sort of summarize and bring it to a close. As we've talked about, the project is on schedule. I think that, I hope you've experienced the working relationship that we've been engaged in with the developer and with DCF. It's been very, very positive. And I think most importantly, we are focusing right now on working on the design, but that our developer continues to engage with the city of South Burlington leadership and the officials around permitting, because we know that's critical to any of the projects. And then Representative Wood, I was going to questions, but based on this presentation, I have a question and that is, we can come back for the next oversight, and is that something that you want to see?
I'll leave that up to the chair.
No, I would say we need to see what the inside will look like.
Yes.
And so because of the speed with which this is moving at this point in time, I'll just give you a heads up that we're gonna have a joint House Human Services and Senate Health and Welfare Committee meeting after the primary at some point in time to probably go in more depth than we're able to go through here because the we don't want to wait till January. You'll be a little too far along, for us to have any, real input into that. So I appreciate the fact that BGS and DCF, working with the developers and having, there's one more piece of that, and that would be the legislative oversight aspect of it. And so this is good. It helps to formulate what our agenda might be for that meeting. But you could expect probably more in-depth questions at that point in time. And
Understood.
I'll say the same thing to DCF when we're talking about.
And what I heard is, I think it's important for us to give you a little bit different view of the site. I think that you were very interested in that, and we can put some of that together. And then what the internal design is looking at and what the flow is. And where you can see the housing and then the educational programs and how they move through the building. And those are the two takeaways that I have today.
So, thank you for that. I think I'm actually impressed with the work that you're doing and how you're doing it. I think the questions that our two committees will have will relate much more to, programs, program design, how the functionality of the building works once it's put in place. And then perhaps as we're going forward with our full committees, we might notice some or provide some ideas that would help. The Joint Justice Oversight Committee will be extremely useful in understanding the security and the process around maintaining that level of integrity for kids. So I think there's a lot here. And I for one, am appreciative of what you've done to this point. I look forward to listening to DCF this afternoon. So, but Rep Wood and I will be talking and having a joint meeting on this. I think we will, we'll be going into a little more depth in some of the areas that perhaps joint justice oversight wouldn't go into ordinarily.
And that's the beauty of this committee, is you folks are here, and at our September meeting, we can do a follow-up to see how far along you are, for us to see any of the internal designs and to hear back of your two committees, the Senate and the House, in terms of what transpired. What you're trying in. Anything else before we take a lunch break? Quick lunch break. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. So let's go off 5 and we're back.